The Boarded Window by Ambrose Bierce. In 1830, only a few miles away from what is now the great city of Cincinnati, Ohio, lay a huge and almost endless forest. The area had a few settlements established by people of the frontier. Many of them had already left the area for settlements further to the west. But among those remaining was a man who had been one of the first people to arrive there. He lived alone in a house of logs, surrounded on all sides by the great forest. He seemed a part of the darkness and silence of the forest, for no one had ever known him to smile or speak an unnecessary word. His simple needs were supplied by selling or trading the skins of wild animals in the town. His little log house had a single door. Directly opposite was a window. The window was boarded up. No one could remember a time when it was not, and no one knew why it had been closed. It surely was not because of the man's dislike of light and air. Sometimes he could be seen lying in the sun on his doorstep. I imagine there are few people living today who ever knew the secret of that window. But I am one, as you shall see. The man's name was said to be Morlock. He appeared to be 70 years old, but he was really 50. Something other than years had been the cause of his aging. His hair and long, full beard were white. His gray, lifeless eyes were sunken. His face was wrinkled. He was tall and thin, with the drooping shoulders, like someone with many problems. I never saw him. These details I learned from my grandfather. He told me the man's story when I was a boy. He had known him when living nearby in that early day. One day, Morlock was found in his cabin, dead. It was not a time and place for medical examiners and newspapers. I suppose it was agreed that he had died from natural causes, or I should have been told and should remember. I know only that the body was buried near the cabin, next to the burial place of his wife. She had died so many years before him that local tradition noted very little of her existence. But there is an earlier part to the story supplied by my grandfather. When Morlock built his cabin, he was young, strong, and full of hope. He began the hard work of creating a farm. He kept a gun, a rifle, for hunting to support himself. He had married a young woman, in all ways worthy of his honest love and loyalty. She shared the dangers of life with a willing spirit and a light heart. There is no known record of her name or details about her. They loved each other and were happy. One day, Morlock returned from hunting in a deep part of the forest. He found his wife sick with fever and confusion. There was no doctor or neighbor within miles. She was in no good condition to be left alone while he went to find help. So, Morlock tried to take care of his wife and return her to good health. But at the end of the third day, she fell into unconsciousness and died. When he was sure she was dead, Morlock had sense enough to remember that the dead must be prepared for burial. He was surprised He did not cry, surprised and a little ashamed. Surely it is unkind not to cry for the dead. "Tomorrow," he said out loud, "I shall have to make the coffin and dig the grave, and then I shall miss her when she is no longer in sight. But now she is dead, of course. But it's all right. It must be all right somehow. Things cannot be as bad as they seem." Morlock had no experience in deep sadness. His heart could not contain it all. His imagination could no longer understand it. He did not know he was so hard-struck. That knowledge would come later and never leave. He laid his arms upon the table's edge and dropped his face into them, tearless and very sleepy. At that moment, a long, screaming sound came in through the open window. But the man did not move. Maybe it was a wild animal, or maybe it was a dream, for Murloc was asleep. Some hours later, he awoke, lifted his head from his arms and listened closely. He knew not why. Who? What had awakened him? And where was it? Morlock had risen to his feet. Extreme fear had caused him to lose control of his senses. He threw his hands upon the table. Nothing was there. With no definite plan and acting like a madman, Murloc ran quickly to the wall. He seized his loaded rifle and without aim, fired it. The flash from the rifle lit the room with a clear brightness. He saw a huge, fierce panther dragging the dead woman towards the window. When he returned to consciousness, the sun was high, and the forest was filled with the sounds of singing birds. The body lay near the window where the animal had left. The clothing was ruined. The long hair was in disorder. The arms and legs lay in a careless way, and a pool of blood flowed from the horribly torn throat. The ribbon he had used to tie the wrist was broken. The hands were tightly closed, and between the teeth, a piece of the animal's ear. The Boarded Window by Ambrose Bierce.